Hello everyone, Abdul here. It's been ages since I've done a video, but today is the June of 19th, 2019. Today is going to be a continuation, or what will serve as the continuation of what's happened in Egypt as of late, with the former president, Mohamed Morsi, passing away while apparently being in court. So they've sent out the his body for burial on the same day as the announcement of the death. And now you've got people pouring their tributes to the ousted Egyptian ex-president, with most of the messages being of a positive nature, especially when it comes to Palestinian solidarity. So he's earned some respect in that regard, despite the fact that he also has ties to the US politically, at least. So that, with regards to those flaws that he has, he's had a positive reputation in that aspect, as I mentioned before. So, as I've written here in my article that I've wrote, I've basically reported what's happened in this in regards to how his death unfolded, and apparently there's calls from human rights organisations and the UN to investigate into his death, with some people, especially some politicians like Recep Tayyip Erdogan, branding his basically Morsi's opponents as tyrants, and some of them have likened it to a murder and a political assassination. Well, speaking of political assassinations, Yvonne Ridley, a former Taliban detainee and journalist, branded it as such, and I was talked about links to Israel, in which MintPressNews' Whitney Webb and Press TV has reported the situation, which confirms the points being made in question. However, while we have positive tributes being mentioned already, the original reason for this video was the negative response to Mohamed Morsi's death, and to be more specific, do I need to say any more? I don't think so. Fort Russ News has published an article written by Joaquin Flores, basically written a hit piece on Mohamed Morsi, but obviously some people aren't happy with his Morsi's stance on Syria. But there you go. But I'll read this out for you. Breaking: Assad curse strikes again. US installed former Egyptian President Morsi dies in court. Sounds pretty gleeful, even though, yeah. Cairo, June 17, 2019. Ex-Egyptian, for the visually impaired, I'm reading out the whole Fort Russ article, which isn't too long in actual fact. Yeah, it's a few mouse scrolls long really. But anyway, I'll read it now. Ex-Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi has died in court just moments ago. Egyptian state television has reported on June 17th. It was reported that he had fainted after a court session and died immediately afterwards. And Morsi, a top figure in the Muslim Brotherhood, was installed by the US, assisted by Turkey and Qatar during the so-called Arab Spring. As an ally of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he was involved in plans to increase Egypt's involvement in the Syrian invasion. He called for Bashar al-Assad to step down. This was in contrast to Mubarak's policy of neutrality towards Syria. As a consequence, he was toppled by the military in 2013 after mass protests against this rule. He had been serving a 7-year sentence for falsifying his candidacy application for the 2012 presidential race. Okay, first off, there's so many things wrong with this article. One, who the hell would actually celebrate celebrate the death of someone who has basically, spoiler alert, has been critical of Israel, and not only that, who the hell would celebrate? Who the hell would not only just celebrate the death, but also there's no mention of Israeli involvement in Morsi's overthrow. Just cut straight. Joaquin Flores just cut straight into Assad. Well, or rather, Morsi disagreed with Assad's status in Syria, calling for him to step down, and it writes it off as just that being the cause of his downfall. That's not true. RT was talking about Morsi's death, fails to make a mention of this too. So I'll read out this article now. Former Egyptian President Morsi dies in court, state TV, which is by RT obviously. Egypt's former president has died suddenly following a court appearance in Cairo, according to Egyptian state television, age 67. The ex-president and Muslim Brotherhood leader collapsed after a trial session in an espionage lawsuit on Monday for alleged contact with Hamas. Okay, there's a partial truth for you. He had reportedly been given permission from the presiding judge to address the court before he fainted. Morsi came to power after Hosni Mubarak was deposed in mass Arab Spring protests in 2011, but he ruled for only a year after being elected to the post before he was toppled by the military following mass protests in 2013. He was serving lengthy sentences on convictions of killing protesters in 2012, espionage involving Qatar, and a jailbreak. Morsi was sentenced to death in 2015 for taking part in a mass jailbreak during Egypt's uprising in 2011, but his sentence was overturned late the following year. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was amongst the first to express his condolences following the news of martyr or Shahid Morsi's passing, tweeting about his great sadness and sorrow at hearing of the death of my brother. Yeah. At least RT wasn't bringing with sensationalism that you expect from the Sun newspaper, but still, there you go. with that out of the way, let's get straight into the fact, straight into what Fort Russ News has missed out on, or what, in terms of who was responsible for the overthrow and what caused it in the first place. Press TV and MintPressNews covers this topic pretty well, and in fact so much so that I think those two articles are worth a very thorough read. The Press TV one goes more into the agreements made between Israel and Egypt. It talks about the Camp David peace agreement. It talks about it more from that slant, but still covers the same points. Whitney's article in question talks about the same subject, but talks about it more from the Syrian disagreement aspect of it. Well, she makes a mention of it, but she also talks more about the actual causes of it and explains it in a much more simpler language, I'd say. So I suggest you read that article and the Press TV one. But anyway, while I'm still alive in here, let's read it then. The first article by Press TV: Israel was behind Morsi's overthrow. Israel was behind the 2013 coup in Egypt that toppled Morsi, and Israeli, the African country's first ever officially reported democratically elected president, and an Israeli general has revealed. Morsi, who was a member of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood Party, entered office after the 2011 uprising against Hosni Mubarak. Brigadier General Arya Eldad wrote in an article in Maariv, the newspaper, that Israeli intelligence officials had reason to believe that Morsi intended to cancel the peace agreements with Israel and send more Egyptian military forces to the Sinai Peninsula. In 1978, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister, then at the time Menachem Begin, I believe that's how you pronounce it, but correct me if I'm wrong, signed the Camp David peace agreements that, amongst other things, required Israel to withdraw all forces from the Sinai Peninsula while limiting the number of forces Cairo could deploy to the region. And the peace agreements also called for the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. According to Eldad, when Israeli officials found out about Morsi's alleged plans, they made it a priority to overthrow the Egyptian president and replace him with the current president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who served as Morsi's defense minister before the coup. At the stage, Israel was quick and willing to activate its diplomatic tools, and perhaps even greater means, to bring Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to power in Egypt, and convince the then US administration under Barack Obama not to oppose this move, wrote the Israeli general. Sisi came into power in 2014, 1 year after leading the successful military coup against Morsi. Today he enjoys overwhelming support in the Egyptian parliament, which voted early this year in favour of constitutional changes that could possibly extend his presidency until 2034. Morsi, aged 68, had been serving a 20-year prison term on charges of ordering the arrest and torture of protesters, a 25-year jail term on charges of passing intelligence to Qatar, and a 3-year term for insulting the judiciary. The Detention Review Panel, a team of UK legislators and attorneys commissioned by Morsi's family, warned last year that he was likely to face premature death in prison, where he was being held in substandard conditions and received cruel and inhumane treatment. Today, Jordan and Egypt are the only two Arab states to have full diplomatic ties with Israel, but the relations remain limited and taboo amongst the general populace. A November report by the UK-based Arabic newspaper Al-Arabi Al-Jadid said Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohamed bin Salman and Sisi have been working together to persuade other Arab leaders to establish close trade ties with Israel while working to resolve political differences with the Tel Aviv regime as well. 40 years after the signing of Camp David, it's clear that Israel is committed to having Egypt on its side, Eldad wrote, citing Israel's reported sale of German submarines to Egypt and the commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the Camp David Agreement as evidence for his claim. Now, contrary to all Israeli expectations, the Camp David Agreement, which was made 40 years ago, has lasted for several decades despite the lack of real peace between us and the Egyptians and despite the failure to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, he argued. And that's where the article ends. So, Press TV reports that Israel was instrumental in installing Abdel Fattah. Yeah, I'm not going to. I forgot his name already. al-Sisi. I'll just refer to him as that from that point forth. The original article that I added into my WordPress post was this one, which I found first, by the way. Basically repeats the same points, but like I said, if this article focuses more on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, well, more clearly, I think, anyway, while talking about the disagreement Mohamed Morsi had with Bashar al-Assad. So, let's read this article by Whitney Webb. IDF General, Israel behind coup that installed al-Sisi dictatorship in Egypt. Brigadier General Ahmed Eldad of the Israel Defense Forces has claimed that Israel was behind the 2013 military coup that ousted Morsi. Eldad made the claim in an article published in the Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv, and in the article Eldad asserted that the outbreak of the January Revolution that coincided with the Israeli security assessment that President-elect Morsi, a Muslim Brotherhood man, intended to cancel the peace agreement with Israel and send more Egyptian military forces to the Sinai Peninsula. Just a few months into Morsi's presidency, in August 2012, Israel had publicly accused Morsi of violating the peace treaty with Israel after Egypt responded to terrorist attacks in the Sinai by sending an increased number of troops. Morsi's government then accused Israel's Mossad of having been behind the attacks in order to destabilize his government and made efforts to improve Egypt's relations with Gaza. Hamas, which has governed the Gaza Strip since 2007, as well as Lebanon's Hezbollah, also blamed Mossad for the attacks, a charge Israel denied. Eldad then added, Israel was quick and willing to activate its diplomatic tools and perhaps even greater means to bring Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to power in Egypt and convince the then US administration under then President Barack Obama to not oppose this move. Events at the time support Eldad's claim as Shortly after the coup, Israel quickly launched diplomatic missions in the US and several European countries to push for support of Egypt's new political reality and to prevent a diplomatic blockade on Cairo following the military coup. Many analysts have noted that under al-Sisi, Egypt-Israel relations have grown to unprecedented levels through policies often driven by al-Sisi himself. And in this opinion it says why Israel wanted Morsi out. While Eldad cited concerns over a rupture of the Israel-Egypt peace agreement as having motivated Israel's role in the 2013 coup, a more probable reason was related to Morsi's relationship with Hamas and efforts to normalize relations with Gaza. Notably, after al-Sisi came to power, the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt and tunnels between Gaza and Egypt were abruptly closed. In addition, soon after the coup, army instigated anti-Palestinian propaganda was rampant throughout Cairo, and Palestinians that had flown into the Cairo airport were quickly deported back to the countries they had recently arrived from, according to The Guardian. In contrast, while Morsi did not end the blockade of Gaza, in force since 2007, he had improved conditions for Palestinians living in the embattled enclave compared to those under his predecessor Hosni Mubarak. And for the vision impaired, you could see, there's a picture inserted into the article with Hosni Mubarak wearing a red jumpsuit that designates he has been sentenced to death, raises his hands inside the defendant's cage in a makeshift courtroom at the National Police Academy in the eastern suburb of Cairo, Egypt, in June 18, 2016. So, after that part, Eldad, in his article, hinted that the coup was related to a, quote, religious war that Israel was and still is fighting against Palestine and Arab majority nations, stating that, contrary to all Israeli expectations, the Camp David agreement, which was made 40 years ago, has lasted for many decades despite the lack of real peace between us and the Egyptians, and despite the failure to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Because this conflict is not just geopolitical, we are rather having a religious war with the Palestinians and Arabs. Though Eldad's recent statements make the connection between Morsi's relationship with Hamas and Israeli involvement in the coup more clear. He had long been suspected. An Egyptian army general told BBC soon after the coup that Morsi's alleged collaboration and good relations with Hamas were a driving factor behind the coup. In a telling incident, Morsi was later charged with terrorism for allegedly conspiring with Hamas, Hezbollah, and elements of the Iranian military to, quote, destabilize, end quote, Egypt. Morsi had been in prison for several years, many of them spent in solitary confinement, and a UK panel of legal experts asserted last year that harsh prison conditions would likely lead to his premature death, which was a concern which actually was realised today, a few days ago, Tuesday, 17th and 18th of June 2019. So, continuing on from this article, prior to being charged for collaborating with Hamas, Morsi had publicly praised Palestinian resistance in Gaza, another likely factor for Israel's decision to place al-Sisi in power was Morsi's efforts to normalize relations with Iran. The accusations against Morsi regarding alleged collaboration with Hezbollah and Iran, both adversaries of Israel seemed unusual to some, given that Morsi had, during his time in office and during the alleged, quote, conspiracy, severed ties with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and supported Assad's overthrow by opposition forces. Hezbollah and Iran, in contrast, supported Assad and fought alongside the Syrian army. Notably, Israel served as one of the masterminds behind the Syrian conflict, which Morsi supported. Hamas, like Morsi's government, had also backed efforts to oust Assad at the time, albeit less publicly. Notably, al-Sisi's government, widely considered a military dictatorship, despite a pale sheen of democracy, has forged increasingly close ties with Israel ever since he came to power in the Coup, and this is unsurprising given Eldad's recent claim that Israel had orchestrated the coup in order to put al-Sisi in power. During his time in control of the country, Israel and Egypt began secretly coordinating military actions in Egypt, a covert alliance that al-Sisi had denied until this January, when he admitted far-reaching coordination between the Israeli Defense Forces, the acronym being IDF, and the Egyptian military. Al-Sisi's efforts to bring Egypt closer to Israel lack popular support, as most trade unions and political parties oppose normalizing relations with Israel. However, al-Sisi, known for his brutal repression of protests, journalism, and any form of dissent, has continued to push forward in his efforts to forge closer ties with Israel, in apparent service to the country, largely responsible for his rise in power. And the article ends there. As you have heard, or as you may have read, the Press TV articles and the MintPressNews article has confirmed the relationships between Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Israel, and how instrumental Israel was in uninstalling Mohamed Morsi while putting al-Sisi in power. Something which Fort Russ News, or more specifically Rockin' Flores, failed to mention. For I've read on this article, the insinuation that this article is trying to make that is that Morsi's demise is solely due to Bashar Assad, or rather disagreeing with him, and then all of a sudden, miraculously, the military forces decide to overthrow him. So, to be honest, I'm not happy with this news article at all. It just smacks of sensationalism. Let's be brutalized. Definitely going for cheap clicks, that's a bloody given. And what else am I supposed to say about this article? Not much, I can tell you that for a fact. And unfortunately, Fort Russ isn't the only one who actually shares this anti-Morsi view. Okay, yes, I understand why some people don't like Mohamed Morsi, but I've been conversing with a few people online, and they see the whole Egypt situation, especially Morsi, is a bit of a, well, it's not exactly binary, but rather the situation is more complicated than it looks at face value, at the very least. So, with that said, yes, I understand that Morsi has flaws. That's a given. But no one should be endorsing regime change, especially when it's done by Israel and Egypt. Well, in this case, most definitely. So, like I said, to be honest, I find that very offensive. Once I delve deep into the whole situation, why? Someone has to tell me why would anyone, in the grand scheme of things, would endorse Israeli, pro-IDF regime change? Oh God! But anyway, that being said, I don't know what else to say in the grand scheme of things. But other than that, I'm just done with the whole situation here for now, at least. And when I said that I'm done with the situation now, at least, I mean it in that case, because you never know with the political stories like this that there might be additional developing stories linked to one story, or in this case the death of Mohamed Morsi, due to cries for an investigation into the condition in which Mohamed Morsi was kept in terms of his solitary confinement and his overall health. And there's additional reports stating that he didn't have adequate food or medical supplies when he was in prison. So that really does suck on a huge scale. And on that note, here's the show notes for the Mohamed Morsi story video that I'm going to put up, detailing all the information surrounding Mohamed Morsi, the fact that he's died, and the tributes people are left with regards to Morsi. But despite his political flaws, people do see him in a favourable light, especially when it comes to Palestine, as I mentioned at the start of the video. So on that note, I'm actually done for real for this video. And as always, I thank you very much for actually taking your time out to watch or listen, or basically taking the content of this video. And I would like to say thank you very much and goodbye.